tried to do, and what was that? Scare people. Very effective. Now let's get over, and he's right. What can happen in an Article 5 convention? First of all, let's use the terms in the article itself. It's a convention, quotes, for proposing amendments. What's the key word there? Proposing. Okay. What's a convention? It's a meeting. So it's a group of people getting together. Where do they come from? States. Now, let's use the word states like we really should be using it. Now, what are states in Europe? England, Netherlands, Holland, Germany, all those, okay? See my geography. You've been there, I take it.
They're nation states.
They're nation states. And we need to think about, because that's when the first states that started, they were nation states, and that's the principle, that's the way we need to think about this meeting. It's a meeting of sovereign states. Now, I know sadly that when we get younger than your generation, right? We don't know what the word sovereignty means. I mean, we don't use it in our vocabulary, and if we use it, then nobody really knows what it means. When we say sovereign states, you know what it really started? I was doing these kind of meetings for almost 9 months before somebody asked me a question, and I began to understand what sovereignty means. And maybe one of you would ask me this question today. Say, well, what happens if 34 states call this meeting and Congress doesn't call a convention? I mean, that's a question you get pretty often. What happens if the states do everything they're supposed to do, pass the resolutions, 34 for the exact same words, by the way. That's the Convention of States plan, is we use exactly the same call. Because, by the way, there's been 400 calls in history, over 400, and we've never had a convention. Why is that? Because they have to be on the same topic. So our plan is to use exactly the same words in every state so Congress can't look at it and say, oh, they don't match. Yeah, they're going to match exactly. Okay? But someone says, well, what happens if Congress doesn't call? Sovereign states, 34. We don't need their permission. You get it? But we are so programmed. We're so programmed that the federal government is our parent, that we are here as adults saying we need permission. When 34 states have application, politically speaking and sovereignty-wise speaking, there will be a convention. But when you think about it, we don't really need their permission. That would be like the parents coming home and asking the children's permission to ground it. And we need to understand that the parents are the federal government, of the federal government are the states. And we have lost that. Most people don't realize that. So back to that topic, it's a convention for proposing amendments. And what does it take in this meeting for this to even get out of the convention? Okay, let's say you have several states. I'm gonna back up and tell you one thing, that we would not be having this conversation. I would be fishing this afternoon. I wouldn't have driven 6 hours over to see you folks, but for this fact alone. Historically, it's in concrete that when this group of states get together, New York gets one vote, Wyoming gets one vote, Missouri, why? Because they're sovereign. It's just like Holland, Netherlands, Germany, Norway. They all get one vote. Someone says, how do you know? Well, there was 22 of those meetings before the founding. There's been 11 after. There's been 3 relatively recently. And guess what? Historically, they follow the same guidelines. They follow the same rules. Some people say, we don't know the rules. The reason they didn't tell the rules in the Constitution is because they knew it so well. They thought everyone should know it well enough that they shouldn't have to tell them what they are. Most of the people, I shouldn't say it this way. In 1787, a lot of the people, some of the people, that would be better, were veterans of up to 5 different conventions. They'd been to 5 already before that. So they knew how to do it. They knew what was supposed to happen and why it really shouldn't have to be explained. And it's in history, and the Supreme Court says history matters. And so what they had in their mind matters. He's gonna ask a hard question. Can I make you stay the last?
Well, it had to do with here, each state gets one vote.
Right.
So just in the plain reading of that amendment, of Article 5,
Mhm.
it says upon the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, followed by a comma, shall call a convention for proposing amendments.
Mhm.
Now, there's a presumption that the convention is a convention of the several states, but that's not modified in that manner in that sentence of the article. So who's to say Congress couldn't call a convention of Congress to propose amendments upon the application of the several states? And
Okay.
change the whole concept of the idea of one state, one vote, or call all 50 states and give proportional
Now, that's
votes
3 questions.
to all states.
I can do
saying.
2, but I can't do 3, because I can't remember that one. Let me say that, first of all, in history matters, and the overall reason for it in an argument legally matters. And the argument is, does Congress have a way to propose amendments already? So who does this one belong to?
Well, no, see, that doesn't, it says
I know when you read the article.
shall call a convention for proposing amendments.
Uh-huh.
My argument to you, or my question to you is,
It was an
there's a
argument,
presumption that each state gets one vote. This just says Congress shall call a convention. It doesn't put any restrictions on the rules of that convention or anything of that nature. So why couldn't Congress call a convention and give proportional voting to the states? So that California gets as many votes as the people in the
It's a
state?
state trigger. Why would
Well,
Congress?
he has a good point, and there is arguments to
Does
that
Congress
effect.
I would disagree with that, because Congress, there's nothing in there that says Congress can make rules for the convention. All they can do is call it together. They have no right to make any rules for what goes on at that convention.
power.
There's nothing in there that says that they can't.
And you know, this is the kind of things that, you know, look at what we're doing. What are we doing? We're having a conversation about the Constitution.
Love it.
That's what we're doing. Last week, and the week before, and the week before, guess what we were having in Jefferson City? We're having a discussion, we're having a conversation about the Constitution. Now, there is an awakening happening. There's people who are awakening up to this fact. And it goes through different processes, it goes through different levels. And at one level, you'll see legislators begin to go, oh, I understand the ratification process now. Wow, it is impossible. It's going to be impossible to get something ratified. Well, not impossible. People argue because it's happened before. But when I understand how hard it is to ratify something, the next question is, why are we doing this? Conversation has value. The conversation has value, and let me tell you why. Who elects our representatives and senators, state and federal? What age group?
Over 18.
55 and over. Yeah, 55 and over are really who elects people. They're the ones that show up time and again. But there is another generation, there's a younger generation out there. And it takes time to explain this, but my point is, this conversation is not only good for the electorate, it's good for the next generation, it's good for the next generation of leaders in the legislature, whatever state we're talking about. This is good for those people. They have to know that this matters. Something matters besides how much money you can raise and how many lies you can tell, how many times you can tell it. This matters. If it matters to you, that's why you're here. How far did you come tonight?
Hour and 3/4.
You know, fantastic. Because this matters to you. And we're having this conversation, and we're having it in a number of states. This exact language that was filed in Missouri was filed in 38 states this year. 38 states, on the way to 41. It's still live in 15. It's not live in Missouri anymore. Let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you before I did that 3 states passed it last year. Many of you know this, but some of you don't. Georgia, Florida, and Alaska have passed this exact same language. Okay? 38, we filed it. Texas has passed it in their House last week, and they're still live. They're headed to their Senate. And their organization in that state has what it takes to get it there. 38 states. In Missouri, we passed it in the Missouri Senate 26-5. It came over to the House, and when the opponents found out that it was going to the floor, they kind of went ballistic. We said, that's fine, we'll be back next year. You know, they had people who have been in the legislature that are ready to term out. They've been there for a while. They had received, this is them, not me, they had received more information, according to them, on this topic from their constituents and others around the state of Missouri than on any other topic they can ever remember getting information in all the years they've been in the legislature. We're just starting. We're just starting. Go ahead.
What was that period of time that they've been getting this information?
Well, if
Past
someone's
year?
left, if someone, it depends if they've been in both the House and the Senate. But I heard that numerous times, and I'm talking about people who are like, this is their last term. So they've been there several years. And it's just a general statement, and nobody's quantifying it, but when someone comes up that and they say that, and then you hear that again, and you hear that the third time from people who've been there for quite a while, and then you know, there was a lot of information. It wasn't all pro. It was 70-30, you know, 70 pro and 30 con. And so we know that most of the information, I haven't seen an argument. I haven't seen an argument on this topic that did not have its roots in the liberal establishment defamation campaign. When someone comes up and says, going to have a runaway convention, that never was a, you know, it was there. It was there even, you know, during ratification. There was people say, well, you know, that they left the articles. But that's an argument that we don't have time for today, and I usually say, we have the Constitution and you love it, and you say you love it, and you say it's, don't tell me it's illegally adopted. If it was, then do you love the Constitution? Yes. Okay, then it's what we've got, let's move forward. And so it does call for an amending process. It does call for the states to have an equal opportunity with Congress to amend it. And so let's use it if possible. And so we went through the House all the way to the end. We did not pass, but we had a conversation. We're proud of what we've done in 2 years. You're next.
Was there any specific group or that was so against it? Who do we need to pinpoint, what I'm saying?
That could get personal.
It could, then it should.
It does. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story. It came to me firsthand. I was this close to a legislator. He said that when this was ready to go to the floor, and found out that it was going to the floor, he got a call from the former head of the GOP committee in Missouri, who's now the head of Eagle Forum, and would not let him get a word in edgewise, screamed at him and said, don't embarrass Phyllis. Now, this has nothing to do with Phyllis Schlafly. You know, I agree with Randy Barnett. She probably deserves the Presidential Medal of Freedom for what she's accomplished in her lifetime. No one wants to embarrass her. That's not what this is about. The fact that she has been against this for 3 decades, and all of her positions are rooted in that defamation campaign, I have nothing but respect. I tell my folks in the Convention of States, these people at Eagle Forum, they've been fighting for things that we believe in longer than we've been alive. So we need to respect them. But they, you know, Randy Barnett says, she wrote a book that changed my life. I love her like a mother, but she's not right on everything. We're not trying to embarrass anyone. And when this became about, there are some organizations that have made this about them. It's about them. It's about them. Look at what we've done. Look at the lives we've been able to enjoy. This is about that. This little girl right here is going to be 30 years old in 2040. Now you do the math. If you have a 5-year-old, they're going to be 30 years old in 2040. It's about that.
Yeah, I came in kind of the middle of this, but you said that the states get together and said Congress doesn't, how is it like they don't recognize it? How do you enforce then what the states have come together to do? Because that's kind of the big question I always have.
It really is.
Federal government just won't recognize it, so it's not valid. We're the ones in charge, label everybody as terrorists. I mean, that seems to be the thing to do these days if you question when it comes to that.
You can have this discussion with 34 states, or you can have it with 38, which might ratify a proposal. Either way, if there's 34 states that agree, or 38 is, of course, a lot better, because that's ultimately ratification. Someone says if they ratify something, how do we enforce it? The president's already doing what he wants to do. He has no, think about the political capital that it requires to ratify something in 38 states. And let's say the two senators in your state decide that they're part of Congress and they're going to ignore the state of Missouri, and they're going to come back and want to be reelected.
Why not? We already got one like that.
Well, we already got one. But you see, the other side of the coin is there's some other things in which states, and only states can actually enforce. And if 38 states ratify something on immigration and then come around and they ask these states to enforce anything else, the states that ratify the change are not going to enforce the federal government. I mean, they better not, because who do they work for? Now, I understand there's always ifs and ands and buts, and I want to say there really is. But what else is the solution? What's the other solution? George Mason stood up in June of 1787 and said this process should be easy, it should be regular, and it should be constitutional. He said, lest it be left to chance and violence. You know, violence is not the answer. Some of you folks you've gone and you've fought, and you've been in those battles in which people don't come home from. It's not an option. It's not an option. Go ahead.
I got a question. In the Senate, was it broken down, the vote Republican, Democrat?
It was bipartisan,
Yeah.
but I can say it was bipartisan with a deal. It wasn't bipartisan by design or by, and I can say in every state where things have passed, it seems to follow party lines. And for the life of me, I mean, I get it, but I don't get it. I mean, is only one party having kids these days? Really? Once in a while, we'll find someone who's an independent. But there is such, these folks are working for their party. They're not working for you. And that's what you have to do in your districts, and what people have to do in their own districts is demand that their representatives either represent them instead of their party, or find someone who will. And I understand that's very difficult, and that's the challenge that we face. Go ahead.
Okay, you said the wording is the exact wording that's going to be passed in all the different states.
And I have a copy over there if you want to look at it.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. What exactly is the topic? What are you,
Well, to deal with these things primarily, but fiscal restraints, when we talk about fiscal restraints, balanced budget is the hub of it. But when this group gets together in this meeting, they have to look and say, is balanced budget by itself going to solve this fiscal problem? We would sit here in this room and say, a balanced budget by itself, and not the right one, is not going to do it, because they're just going to raise taxes. They're just going to print money. So we have to have fiscal restraints. That's why someone says, well, I want you to propose an amendment. What do you really want? You know what my answer is? I'm not smart enough to do that. The patient is dying. We all agree the patient is dead tomorrow. We know what unsustainable means. So my job, as I see it, is I'm driving the car, okay? Now we're headed to the emergency room, and there are people who are a lot smarter than me who can do this type of thing. It's not going to be an individual, it's going to be a group deliberation. They do this in emergency rooms too, by the way. And so what people want to do is they want to talk about how to fix this patient before we ever get in the car and go. And my point is, let's just get in the car, let's go. We can talk about what may be wrong and what some of the solutions might be on the way, but we don't have a lot of time. Now, Tom Colburn from Oklahoma, he lobbied state legislatures last week from a hospital bed in Oklahoma. He says, after being in Washington, he says, you cannot imagine the speed at which your liberty and your country are being destroyed. And he says, I've been there for 16 years, and they're not going to fix it. They can't fix it. And he asks state legislatures to simply do what the Constitution gives them the authority to do. And yes, I'll call it a Federal Oversight Committee meeting. We know what happens in your homes if you go on vacation. When you had teenagers and you went for maybe the weekend, if you stayed away too long and you come back and your house is burned down, you really shouldn't be surprised. Because you didn't leave any oversight. You know what happens in county governments? We just talked about county and city governments and state bureaucracies without oversight. What happens? People are people, and they'll steal your blind. They'll spend everything, and people are people. The framers understood that. And so they gave the federal government an oversight committee. It's called Article 5. And some people say, well, we have the 10th Amendment. What's the 10th Amendment say? Anybody know that?
Enumeration of,
Right?
or no, that's the ninth.
Whatever is not specifically given to the federal government is reserved to the states and the people. Tell me one thing in the Constitution besides Article 5 that gives you a mechanism for enforcing it. Is there one? If there is, I'd say we better start using it. But the point is, well, let's use nullification. Wait a minute, I'm not against nullification. It's got its place. Try to nullify that. Nullify that. Nullify the 80,000 pages of federal agencies, regulations that passed in 1 year. And when you nullify it in one state, then you got to nullify it in another state. So I'm not against that. There are times when it's your only weapon, you got to do it. That number's out of. We're going to keep on borrowing because that's their plan, but I want us to see this is today. And over there is 2040 when my granddaughter will be 30 years old. You see, we can't get quite enough money together to buy all the votes. We can buy a lot, but we can't buy them all. And this number doesn't come from it. This number comes from,
CBO.
Bloomberg. CBO. There's one Bloomberg published it. You see the little red on top? That's interest. What's the rate of interest they're using probably? Riff.
1%.
What'd you guess? 1 point something, or 1 point something? What happens if it goes to 3? You see, we're already spending more on interest, and this is 2 years ago, than we're spending on entire parts. The White House said in March that by 2021 we'll be spending more on interest. The White House. I don't know if I trust them or not, but they're probably right.
You can't trust.
More on interest in 2021 than we'll be spending on national defense, according to those folks.
I think they were proud of it.
Yeah. Well, I've been showing you all this and boring you to get to this slide.
No.
Okay? This is today. This is the interest that we're spending. This is when my granddaughter is going to be 30, 2040. But I want you to look over there, and I want you to just think about her life. If she lives long enough, Lord willing, she'll see her own children come 30. What year will that be? If she has them when she's 24, it'll be 2064. When I talk to high school students and I visit with them and I show them this slide and visit this bit, and I say, is there anybody that you know that thinks they'll be in America to grow up in 2069? They don't know. They can't tell you for sure. They don't know. And so if you have a system of misinformation, concealment, deception like we have, if we have people who will show that they're totally incompetent and unreliable, not to mention coercive and abusive, if they work for you, what do you do with them? Yeah, they're gone. How's that working for us? There's the Senate since 1964.
Very well.
House of Representatives, I'm sorry, Senate now. Yes, that's, once they get in there, we have to have a system. I'm not for term limits. I'm for some kind of rotation. Because I know there are good people we may want to send again. If you love them enough, if they've shown that they don't get completely disconnected and get Potomac fever, and then after they've come home and lived in your district and ran a business and lived under the regulations they've helped put into place, and you want to send them back, that's your liberty. Yeah. Tom?
I need to take a moment, because I need to know who I am and what I'm talking about.
Okay. You gonna say your name first?
My name is Roger Brown. I'm from here. I know Mrs. Caston. I've been in meetings with her and some of these other fine folks.
Okay.
Do
you have a question? Because
I am much in favor of this convention of states. I think this is a grand idea, although I see some minuscule problems.
I agree.
When I was raised in the 50s, it was commonplace for everyone to be very patriotic. Just after the end of the war, we were all very much in favor of doing anything it was that we could for our country. Pledging allegiance to the flag was an honor. Somewhere between then and now, after the 10 years I spent in the military, after the Vietnam experience, I come home to find out that we have a situation like this where people who get to Washington become a political nobility, and they are completely separated from us. Now, the problem I have with the Convention of States, and if you'll excuse me, Mary, I'm not talking about you particularly. We are going to send representatives who have been elected to represent us to make these amendments about the same elected people that we have in Washington. My fear is they're going to look at that as a future job and go, whoa, I don't want to do that, because it's going to hurt my chances. I don't want to have term limits. I honestly believe 6 years should be the only period of time you should ever be able to serve. And after that, you cannot serve again. Do away with this. If you had that on your resume, my goodness, what could you do in this world?
Awesome.
Yeah, why go back? You know, if the senators are elected for one term of 6 years, why not make it the president, the House, everybody, and have elections every 2 years and rotate it? Get rid of them. Let them do what they can. Get out of Dodge. Let somebody else take over.
Now you see what we're doing? We're
That's
having a
my
conversation, and we just listened to you, and I don't disagree. What I heard was a position a little different from my own that makes me think. And that's what happens when folks get together and have a conversation and deliberate. And that's what groups from individual commissioners, which are called committees, that come together from the states would able to do. What we do is when we have an Article 5 convention and call for a convention of states, we don't call and give people the opportunity to change the Constitution. They can just make proposals, which George Mason said this part should be easy and regular and constitutional. We know how hard it is to ratify anything. And so that committee who makes a proposal, they're just proposals. They're worthless until 38 states agree. And it's hard to get that done. So what we just did was have a conversation. And what I want to finish this point by saying all we're asking for when we ask your representatives to vote yes on an application for a convention of states is for these people to go somewhere. And yes, it costs money. And yes, we'll have to figure out how to fund it. But we think the conversation, I mean, these states face things collectively. Now, can Arizona take on the federal government by themselves? We saw that happen. And we saw another state do that, another state. But we need to take it on. We have to have a conversation about what we face collectively. And it's not going to be an easy conversation.
Just
Fred.
one point to his, one quick point. Nothing says that it has to be elected officials that are sent to the convention either.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the founding fathers were not elected officials.
And
when they
here,
wrote all this.
I want to follow up on his because I was kind of confused, and I know you understand, but here's what the founders did. They're brilliant. They put this nation in the hands of somebody you know. You know who your state represents. You know him by name. Some of you have been to his house or her house. The framers put the nation in the hands of the people closest to you. Now, should they be the most powerful? Yes, they should. And what are they? They've given away their sovereignty, and they're the weakest. What this process allows 38 states to come together in a discussion, and I want to tell you that just the thought of having this discussion made the Missouri delegation, congressional delegation, sit up and say, what's going on? Hey, what are you doing? I'm not making it up. And we said, well, we'll talk to you after the session to vote for. And we did. We will. But this discussion is in itself an implication. It's an indictment on what they've done. And in their defense, If you were to run for Congress and get through the process and be a freshman senator or representative up there, after the first year, you would understand what happens. They demand that they raise all this money. They spend all the time raising money. Rand Paul and all these guys, your heroes, the people you really respect, them too. They are demanded to raise money up there. They spend an enormous amount of time to do that, and it hamstrings these people. And so someone said, well, what if we have term limits on the leadership? That's another topic. You see, the discussion has value. I'm going to run out of time, but I don't want to miss these questions. You had one, and these questions are what generate really good stuff. Go, you're first then.
Okay, yeah. I was talking to Chuck Ferguson earlier today, former Senator Chuck Ferguson, and he spent 16 years in the legislature altogether.
Now you're talking about the state legislature, right? Okay.
Yeah, he's from the West Plains area.
Okay. I don't know.
And kind of the conversation, one of the things he brought up is that, when he started, the Republicans were in the minority, and then they took over, they became the majority.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing them behave like Democrats, And so who chooses the delegates, it's our state legislature.
He just asked the best question. He asked the most, of all the questions that were good, that's the best question.
I was gonna ask it.
Well, wait a minute. That's the best question, because the answer is this. The Convention of States plan is that we have an organization. We started and we're continuing to develop an organization in every House district, 162 of them, by the way, and that covers the Senate's districts, right? We have to have an organization of people who used to be disengaged, but now they've decided that we have to be engaged. It's called self-governance. Self-governance. I used to think it was a great idea as long as you did it, but now I figured out I have to do it too. And why do we need that organization? Because calling the convention is the easy part. I'm convinced that we can do the call. The call's going to happen. I mean, when you have exact language in 38 states the first year, it's like when it starts going off an avalanche, it's going to happen. There's going to be 34 states who are going to use the exact same language. That's the easy part. The next part is the hardest, and that is if we send the wrong people to this meeting, we've worse than screwed up. We've worse than wasted our time. And so we have to be there when your legislator is making this decision. Someone says, I want to send the governor. Whoa, 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 whoa. The governor doesn't even know we have a constitution. We think this gentleman, he's widely respected. He's not in Congress anymore. He worked well on both sides of the aisle. He's respected. He's turned out. He's doing it. He's out there in the real world. We're going to nominate him, and we're going to ask that you get behind him. And then we'll have other people, and some will be in the legislature. I would rather that they not any of them be in the legislature, personally. And the rules will be, and I want to say that I think in Missouri we probably got the cart before the horse. Someone says, well, why didn't this pass? Well, because we got the cart in front of the horse. Well, I guess the cart's supposed to be in front of the horse, isn't it? We got the horse in front of the cart. My point is, states that have taken the leadership, my wife's laughing, she goes, yeah, he says it wrong every time. States that take the leadership in putting together a program, a plan, a bill, a delegate selection apparatus, structure ahead of time, makes people more comfortable. This is what we're going to do when we finally get around to doing it. And this is how we're going to select them. This is who they're going to be. And we're going to give them, they're called commissioners. They have a commission. Now, I know some are